I am here to talk to you today about how we can create millions of jobs at almost zero cost. And the way to think about this is by creating local stock exchanges. It's a fabulous and easy social innovation. Now, I know that much of the country right now is livid about the stimulus package. $750 billion were spent, $750 billion were spent, and yet unemployment across the country is still very close to 10%. Now, I share the frustration over this limited success or failure, depending on your perspective, of the stimulus package, but I don't think the government should have done nothing. I think there is something the government can do. And to understand where job creation is possible, take a look at this slide. This slide captures the history of economic development over a 10-year period in Lane County, Oregon. During this period, several million dollars were given in tax abatements. 95% went to 6 non-local businesses. 3 came, took the benefits, and then promptly shut down and moved to Asia. 3 came, took the benefits, and under-delivered the jobs that they promised. The other 5% of the tax abatements went to 50 local businesses. They made very modest promises, and by and large, they delivered their promises. The bottom line was stunning, because in public dollar terms, the cost of a job from a local business was $2,000. The cost of all the jobs produced from the non-local stimulus was $22,000. It was 10 times more expensive. But remember, some of those jobs came and went. So in net job terms, the cost of a non-local job was $67,000, 30 times more expensive to get a job from a non-local business. Now let's compare this to the stimulus package. Christina Romer of the Council of Economic Advisors says, and most people think she's exaggerating, but she says $750 billion created between 2.5 and 3.5 million jobs. Do the math. We're talking about $200,000+ a job, $300,000+ a job, 100 to 150 times more expensive to do job creation the stimulus Obama way, because we largely focused on pork barrel projects and large corporations rather than micro businesses. There's more evidence as well. There have been 9 studies done over the last 10 years comparing the relative job impact of a dollar spent with a local business compared to a non-local business. They basically show that the typical dollar in a local business generates 2 to 4 times as many jobs in a community. Why? Because those local businesses spend their money locally. Local business services, they get local profits, they use local advertising. These things add up to a higher economic multiplier, more income, wealth, and jobs. It means if you spend $1 on a book at a local bookstore as opposed to a Borders, you'll get 2.5 times more jobs in the community as a result of that spending. Now, this is what economic development does today at the state level. This is a study I did for the Kellogg Foundation looking at the 3 largest economic development programs in 15 US states, 45 programs in all. And what we found was that most of the programs spent most of their money on non-local businesses. In most cases, well over 90% of their money. We're absolutely at the state and the national level doing the wrong kind of stimulus for jobs. It's indefensible, and it's even more indefensible when we consider how competitive locally owned businesses are. Despite the best efforts of national and state policymakers to kill local businesses because of inattention or subsidizing the global competition, local businesses have actually done very well. In the period of globalization between 1990 and 2006, local businesses started with 53% of all the jobs in our economy, and gee, if you had a microscope, you would see it's now about 51%. No change at all, and actually, this is employee businesses. Yet in home-based businesses, there's been absolutely no change. Local businesses are resilient, and they're more than resilient. They are profitable. It turns out that sole proprietorships, which are most of what local businesses are, generate 3 times more profit per unit of business than do C corporations, which are the typical entity that are used by large business, with partnerships somewhere in between. So you would think that local businesses being such good buys would be where we put our investment dollars. If you think they're competitive now, think what's going to happen in the next generation. As oil prices go up, what we're going to see is more local energy projects. These are inherently local businesses. We're going to see more home-based businesses as people decide it's too expensive to commute. Global shipment of goods, such as Walmart production in China to bring goods 10,000 miles to Vermont, is not going to be possible anymore because the shipping costs are going to outswamp the cheap labor costs in China. So we're going to see a massive move to localization. But are we prepared to invest in this transition? That leads me to an observation about today's investment system. Now, even though it's dark, I want to do a little survey. By show of hands here, how many people do their banking in a local bank or credit union? Okay, let the record show it's most of the hands. We're in Burlington, after all. Now, by show of hands, how many people here have most of your pension funds in local business? Or even 10% of your investment funds in local business? Okay, I see one hand, Will Rapp, but the others, oh, there's another lurking back there. This is outrageous. This is the most progressive city in the United States. And let it be said that all of you are systematically overinvesting in Fortune 500 companies you distrust, and not investing at all in local businesses we know are essential for job creation. If you look at all of the money that's sloshing around in our savings, in household savings and in nonprofit savings, we have $26 trillion in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance funds. Not a penny is going into local business. That is outrageous. Why is this misallocation taking place? Because we have securities laws that were enacted in the early Jurassic period. And they make it extremely expensive for small investors to find small businesses. We created a system of investment apartheid. If you are an accredited investor, a rich person, 2% of the population, you can invest in anything you want. If you're in the other 98%, sorry, the business first has to invest about $200,000 in lawyers' fees for a private placement memorandum or a public offering statement, in tiny single-space print in all caps lettering that no human being has ever been observed to read. Nevertheless, some people have gone the distance. When Ben & Jerry's, the Vermont company, decided to first go public, they decided to go public in a local way. They would only issue local stock. You had to be a resident of Vermont to buy and sell it. Unfortunately, they didn't do that in subsequent stock issues and got hostilely taken over by Unilever, so you have to stay the course. Here's another example, the Mercantile in Powell, Wyoming. This is a small town. They built a general store. They did so by issuing local stock and selling it door to door like Girl Scout cookies. It was a great concept, built the store, it became an icon for the town. But these are unusual. We have a core problem, because when the securities laws were enacted, we basically came to the conclusion that the way to prevent people from getting into bad deals was to ban them from participating unless they paid off gigantic fees to lawyers. It was basically the idea of prohibition, too. Sorry, you can't drink. You cannot drink responsibly. You cannot invest responsibly. Think of how weird this is. There are 1,000 casinos in North America. If you walk into one of these casinos and decide you want to play blackjack, when I walk through the door, do they say, "Excuse me, Mr. Shuman, but are you an accredited gambler?" No, they don't say that. Do they say, "Excuse me, but have you read this thick disclosure statement about all of the risks of playing blackjack?" No. So we have two worlds. One world, gambling, where you can lose everything for nothing, independent of your income. And we have another world called local investment, which is necessary for our long-term prosperity and jobs, and says, sorry, you can't do it. We got to fix this problem. My proposal is simple. Let's just create a waiver in the securities laws for $100 that we choose to invest in a local business. No extra paperwork required at all. We'll do this just in micro businesses in a kind of experimental way, and we'll see how it works out. My guess is we will get a tidal wave of investment. What would be the cost of the Obama administration doing this? Zero. It is simply at the regulatory stroke of a pen. Now, it's not enough to just create stock, local stock. We've got to create lots of local stock issues, but we have to make it easy for people in a community to buy and sell them. So, what would a Vermont stock exchange look like? Not like this. It would be a virtual stock exchange. 3 months ago, the virtual local stock exchange was created. If you go on the web, you will find a company called Mission Markets, which is now open for business to create kind of bulletin board portals where places, communities, regions can set up exchanges for local securities. And there's lots of other things that are underway that don't require any kind of political reforms at all. An organization called Cutting Edge Capital is bringing down the costs of public offerings. New Mexico passed a state law that makes it cheap and easy to create local stock. Cleveland is having a serious conversation about creating a local stock exchange for new cutting-edge local food businesses. And here is the stimulus home run, a tax credit. When candidate Obama was running for office, he said, we should give people a 5–10% tax credit for investment in rural micro-businesses. Great idea. Shouldn't just be rural micro-businesses. It has been forgotten. Bring it back. We need a national tax credit in investment in local businesses across the board. But if you can't do it nationally, think about doing it at a state level. Because once you got a tax credit in place, suddenly tens of thousands of securities attorneys across the country who are skeptical of this idea would try to figure out how to move the law in the direction we're talking about. Think about the impact of shifting the money. Again, we have $26 billion in stocks, bonds, pension funds, mutual funds, and life insurance funds. $26 trillion, rather. Think about half of that money moving to half of the economy that's local. That would be an efficient market allocation. $13 trillion moving into our communities. Imagine the kind of jobs that can come out of that. And also imagine what happens when $13 trillion leaves the conventional economy. $13 trillion moves out of Walmart and BP and other Fortune 500 companies. This will be the most significant financial revolution ever to happen in modern times. Where I want to leave you is this. President Obama, if you really care about creating jobs without increasing the deficit, please make your next financial stimulus package about creating local stocks and local stock markets. The key to global prosperity is local reinvestment. Thank you.